Last week, we saw CJ Stroud, Tank Dell, CeeDee Lamb, Rachaad White, Cade Otton, and Amari Cooper go off in fantasy football and help people win their matchups. In today's video, I am bringing you 10 players who will do the same this week, who will absolutely crush it and dominate the competition in week 10. So if you have these players starting, get ready for a good week. And if you're facing them, I'm sorry, it might not be your best ever week. Let me ask you, do you believe in redemption? Do you believe in redemption? Because there might not be some popular picks on today's video, but I am bringing you redemption picks. I'm predicting some bounce backs as we head into week 10. The first player that I think is going to turn it around and absolutely dominate this week is Bejon Robinson versus the Arizona Cardinals. Let's be honest. Let's be transparent. There's no need to lie. Bejon has been a disappointment for fantasy football recently. There's just absolutely no way around that. However, if we remove week 7, remember, week 7 is the game versus Tampa Bay where Bejon was active, but he didn't play. He played 17% of the snaps. He only had one touch. It was the headache game. If we take away that game from the NFL slate, let's just remove week 7. You can see where he ranks with his usage. Carries, he would be 14th amongst running backs. Targets, he would be first amongst running backs. His total touches per game without that bomb game where he didn't play, he would almost be seeing 18 touches per game this year. His snap percentage would be 8th amongst running backs, and his routes run per team dropback would be 3rd amongst running backs. So the point is, that game really hurt his fantasy outlook, but the volume is still there for Bejon, and now he has an incredible matchup for him to bounce back with. The Cardinals, his matchup this week, they allow 129 rushing yards per game to opposing running backs. That is the 7th most in the NFL. They also allow the 6th most points per game to opposing offenses, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to running backs at 24.5 points per game. So while we can all be on the same page, angry at Arthur Smith for the misusage, the volume is there, and it's an incredible matchup. This should be a competitive game. Bejon Robinson is going back into my lineup. I've seen a lot of people on our channel this week say, you sit Bejon. He's a must sit. Not in my eyes. I'm starting that guy. I know it's rough, but the talent is there and the opportunities are still there in the right matchups. This is the right matchup. He's going to smash it. The second player that I believe is going to dominate in week 10, we're going to label week 10 Bounce Back City. I'm officially labeling, putting the stamp, week 10 is Bounce Back City. We got another bounce back opportunity for DK Metcalf versus the Washington Commanders. Let's go good news, bad news. What do you guys want first? You want the good news or the bad news? Let's get the bad news out of the way here. The bad news for DK is he has been extremely disappointing so far this year. He's had no boom games really at all. Hasn't had a single game over 20 PPR points this year. However, in each of his last 3 seasons, he's had at least 3 games over 20 PPR points, so we know what he's capable of. Some more bad news. This is his lowest points per game since his rookie season. He is 35th amongst wide receivers on a per game basis. More bad news. He's been dealing with a lot of injuries this year, a multitude of injuries. And lastly, it was his worst game of the year last week versus the Baltimore Ravens. Rent is past due, ladies and gentlemen. It is time to make your money, DK Metcalf. Let's get to the good news part of this, why you should start him. This is the healthiest he's ever been this year, and everybody is going nuclear versus this Washington Commanders secondary. Trust me, I'm a fan of the team. I watch their games every week. Every week it's a new wide receiver absolutely dominating our secondary. In 2023, the Commanders give up the 3rd most points to fantasy wide receivers at 34 points per game. Remember, A.J. Brown this year, 2 of his biggest games came against the Washington Commanders. Over 33 PPR points in 2 games versus this secondary. Remember as well, DJ Moore on Thursday Night Football had his best career game versus the Washington Commanders. He put up 49 PPR points, over 200 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. He did it against that Washington Commanders secondary. And Drake London, the young Drake London, had his second best ever career game with over 21 PPR points. You guys noticing a little bit of a trend? Those big body specimen type receivers are able to dominate this secondary. I believe that we're going to see DK Metcalf have a field day and finally break out in 2023. Add that to the fact that this team was embarrassed last week versus the Ravens. This is a get-right game for DK. It's a get-right game for this offense, and they have found the perfect defense to go out and get it done because Geno Smith is not going to be facing the pressure that he did versus the Ravens versus the Commanders at home now that they don't have Sweat or Chase Young. So fire up DK Metcalf. I know it's been rough, but for most people, he should be a fantastic start. I'm going to go ahead and claim over 15 PPR points guaranteed in week 10. All right, this takes me to my spicy, bold, hot take of the week. You guys have been liking this segment, and here we are with another one for you. Do you believe in redemption? I said there would be some redemption picks, and in today's spicy, bold take of the week, in week 10, I am predicting Tony Pollard will bounce back with 18 PPR points and score his first touchdown since week 1. And it is the perfect matchup for him to dominate. We got 2 running backs so far that people are losing confidence in, Bejon and now Tony Pollard. I promise you, though, this is the perfect bounce back for Tony Pollard. In 2023, the Giants give up the 6th most points to fantasy running backs, almost 22 points per game. But more importantly, think about this for a second, guys. The Giants might genuinely be the worst team in the NFL today as we sit here and look at these rosters. Daniel Jones tore his ACL. Tyrod Taylor is out. Danny DeVito, it's Tommy, we call him Danny DeVito, is forced to start. He should not be starting in the NFL. The offensive line is awful. The defense is atrocious. Tommy DeVito, which that's his real name, in his 2 games of action, Tommy will be their starter. He has been awful. Versus the Raiders last week, he threw 2 interceptions. He did not throw the ball down the field very much. And as a total, that offense scored 6 points. 6 total points with Danny DeVito under center. The week before that, when they played the Jets, the guy had negative passing yards. So this is rough in New York. And now the poor lad, Tommy DeVito, has to play the Dallas Cowboys defense, the same defense that shut out Daniel Jones and these Giants in week 1 when they were arguably more healthy. Remember, that's the game where the Cowboys won 40-0. In return, because of that game script, because of how good this matchup is, I could see the Cowboys dominating this game, leading to a ton of opportunities for one Tony Pollard. Remember, the last time Tony played the Giants in week 1, in that blowout, he scored 21 PPR points and had 2 rushing touchdowns. The Cowboys did not need to force the ball through the air, and the Giants' defense is not good against the run. All signs are pointing to a breakout here. They currently give up 127 rushing yards per game to opponents. That's the 8th highest mark in the NFL. They just lost one of their best interior defensive linemen to the Seattle Seahawks, and they also allow 4.6 yards per carry to opposing running backs, which is the 4th highest mark in the NFL. I know it's been rough, guys. I know it's been rough, but Tony Pollard is set to explode. He's been waiting on those touchdowns, and I think that comes here in week 10. Let me know what you think about the hot take. You like it? You don't like it? It's got to be spicy for a reason, okay? I can't call it a spicy, bold take and not go out there. But I think it's going to happen. All right, the 4th player that I think is going to dominate at the tight end position, that is Dalton Schultz at the Cincinnati Bengals. Since week 4, Dalton Schultz has been a monster in fantasy football. In targets, he is 5th on a per game basis, 7.2 targets per game. He's averaging over 60 receiving yards. And on a per game basis, he is 3rd in scoring amongst fantasy tight ends, almost 16 points per game. And now in week 10, he has an incredible matchup versus the Bengals defense. The Bengals give up the 2nd most points to fantasy tight ends on a per game basis, the 2nd highest over under of the week, meaning Vegas predicting a lot of points here. The Texans, we know they can put up points, and Dalton is a massive part of their offense. So if the Bengals put up points, like we all expect Joe Burrow and this team to put up points. If that's the case, we could see some beautiful garbage time from one Dalton Kincaid. I'm saying the team might be down by a touchdown at multiple parts in the game, and in the 4th quarter, you're trying to come back. CJ Stroud could be targeting Dalton Kincaid a lot, And even if it's garbage time points, it all counts the same. The fourth quarter points count the same as the first quarter points, and we'll take that for Dalton Schultz this week. Okay, the fifth player that I believe is going to dominate this week, that is Chris Olave at the Minnesota Vikings. Why did I do that? I'm so sorry. That should not have happened. But here we are. Olave and Carr, they have not been on the same page very much this year. Now, Olave did score a touchdown last week. That's good to see, but overall, they've not been on the same page. The good news is Olave is getting a ton of opportunities in 2023. Let's look at this. In routes run, he's sixth amongst wide receivers, over 310 routes run. In targets, he's sixth amongst wide receivers, already at 85 targets this year. His first read targets is 10th in the NFL, meaning who's your quarterback looking at first. His end zone targets, he's 10th in the NFL with 8. And his air yards, this number, if any of them, show how these guys haven't been on the same page. He has the second most air yards of any wide receiver in the NFL. They are targeting him. They are targeting him down the field. Those targets just haven't been on the same page just yet. But the good news is we've got the big three, if you will. We got LeBron, we've got Dwayne Wade, and we got Chris Bosh. We got talent. We got targets, and we've got the matchup to blow up. This week, he gets the Vikings, who give up the 9th most points to fantasy wide receivers, giving up over 30 points per game. Josh Dobbs in that Vikings offense is going to be able to score. I think we know that by now. And Olave is going to be a necessary part in this offense if the Saints have any chance to win. I believe this could be Olave's best fantasy performance so far this year. Okay, the sixth player that I think is going to dominate, let's go to the quarterback spot. If he's available, or he's on your roster, this guy should be starting. That is Jared Goff versus the Chargers. This game has all the signs of a shootout, as both of these teams are top 10 scoring offenses in the NFL. And Vegas seems to agree with me, as this currently has the highest over-under of the week. So do not be surprised if the most fantasy points of any matchup in the NFL this week comes from this matchup, Lions, Chargers, and it could not be a better matchup for Jared Goff specifically. Even despite playing Zach Wilson last week, the Chargers still give up the most points on a per game basis to fantasy quarterbacks at just under 21 points per game. And that secondary in Los Angeles is allowing the most passing yards per game at 286. No other team in the NFL is above the 280 mark. They are by far the worst secondary in the NFL. We've got a healthy Amon-Ra, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, Jamison Williams, Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to get involved. Goff could be on for a massive week, and he should be in starting lineups for sure. Imagine if the Chargers can keep pace here. This could be a game that goes into the 30s for both teams. It really could. The seventh player that I believe is going to dominate this week, we told you to start him last week because the training wheels were getting taken off, if you will. Aaron Jones at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last week, Matt LaFleur, again, he told us they were going to cut loose on Aaron Jones, and they did just that. He played a season high in snap share, 57%, and more importantly, he had 26 total touches, by far the highest mark for him this year. It looks like we are finally going to get healthy Aaron Jones, the guy that we anticipated when we drafted him in the offseason. And he gets to play the Steelers, which is a great matchup. They give up the 7th most points to fantasy running backs, averaging 21.7 points per game to the position. And they also allow the 4th most rushing yards per game at 133. They are one of 5 teams in the entire NFL allowing more than 130 yards per game on the ground. Aaron Jones is back, and he should be back finding his home in your starting lineups. All right, the 8th player that I think is going to dominate. This is a fun one. I am so excited. You guys know, if you've been on the channel for a while, how much I love Kyler Murray. I'm excited to start him in some Superflex leagues. But more importantly, Hollywood Brown is going to dominate this week versus the Atlanta Falcons. This has very little to do with this being a good matchup because Atlanta gives up the 11th fewest points to the position. So they're kind of middle of the pack. but it has everything to do with the fact that Kyler Murray is back. In case you may have forgotten, last year, Hollywood was Kyler's number one receiver, and he was lethal in fantasy football before picking up that injury in week 6. In that time span, from weeks 1 to 6, Hollywood Brown was 4th amongst wide receivers in targets, averaging a ridiculous amount of targets. He was 5th in the NFL in receptions. He was averaging over 18 PPR points per game. He was a wide receiver 7 on a per game basis. And in that time span, he was the wide receiver 5 in fantasy football. In that span, Hollywood had more targets than Justin Jefferson, than CeeDee Lamb, than AJ Brown. I expect Hollywood to get a ton of targets in what is a clear upgrade to Kyler Murray. And honestly, just purely off of the vibe check, I'm finding a way to put Kyler Murray and Hollywood Brown into my lineups. I want to see that duo back on fire. Okay, the 9th player that I think is going to dominate, we love him. We've been talking about him a lot this offseason. That is Breece Hall at the Raiders. Since the Jets took the training wheels off of Breece Hall in week 5, he's been ridiculously good in fantasy football. And here's the thing. We haven't even seen max volume, max opportunities for Breece Hall yet. Check this out. From week 5 onwards, he's averaging over 20 points per game. But his attempt share is only 7th. He's only getting 65.3% of those rushing attempts. That number could go up. His snap share is 17th amongst running backs, only averaging 61% of the snaps. That number could go up. All these numbers could absolutely go up. He's getting targeted a lot. He's getting almost 21 touches per game. And the thing is, what I'm trying to explain is there could be even more ahead for a guy like Breece Hall. They've unleashed him, but there could be more and more of this offense leaning on him. And now he gets to play the Raiders, who give up the 4th most points to the position at over 23 points per game. The same defense that allows the 2nd most rushing yards per game in every single format. I don't care if you're in an 8-man league. Breece Hall has got to be starting in your lineups. And the last player that I think is going to dominate, a little bit of a player that people don't necessarily have a ton of belief in just yet, that is Calvin Ridley versus the San Francisco 49ers. Yes, it's been up, it's been down. That's 100% the truth this year with Calvin Ridley. The good news is the Jags play the 49ers this week. So if you think about the game script here, how do you imagine this game playing out? I think we all expect the 49ers to put up big points off of their bye week. Deebo Samuel is back. He's healthy. CMC is healthy. Kittle, Ayuk, the whole gang is all back together. I think they're going to come out and try and put up a ton of points. The point being, if that's the case, Ridley's going to be very necessary for the Jags if they want to win this game. And this is actually a good matchup for fantasy wide receivers. The 49ers are not a scary matchup for your wide receivers in fantasy. They give up the 5th most points to the position, over 32 points per game. The secondary is not living up to the hype. They're nowhere near as good as they were last year. You can start Calvin Ridley with some confidence here in week 10. So those are 10 players that I believe are going to dominate this week. Do me a massive favor. Go ahead and smash that like button for me. Very simple way for you to help this channel grow. Subscribe if you like fantasy football. We've got a lot of content on the channel. And lastly, if you want to support the channel a little bit more in depth, if you want to offer a little more support, feel free to sign up with our promo code LAND to the Flock Fantasy website. You'll get 30% off your membership. You'll get my weekly rankings. You'll get rest of season rankings, dynasty rankings, Superflex one quarterback. You'll get articles from the best minds in the industry and so many personal perks. So go check that out. Check the description, and I appreciate you guys. Go get a win here in week 10. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh,
It's so easy. Even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.